Hello everybody, today we're going to be looking at the KT-R1. Now looking at the device, there's some things immediately that I like about it quite a bit. First off, we have these two front-firing speakers, which as we've established now through many other devices such as the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally, it's going to provide us the best spatial sound and the best sound experience. Looking over here, we've got two standard start and select buttons. We also have an additional set of buttons underneath, which are actually going to be our function buttons. Now, these are currently not mappable. However, as they stand, one is a home button and the other is a function button. In the future, these have been determined to have mappable functions brought to them. As it stands at this point, this does not exist, so we'll leave that out for now. We also have a stack style switch setup here. As you can see, they're not exactly sitting on top of each other like they would on the ROG 405 or ROG 505, but instead they lie right by next to each other. These are quite easy to press down, so if you have them in your pocket, you will find some accidental presses, which I've experienced. However, the experience with clicking them is very satisfying. I would liken this to something like a gaming mouse. I have a SteelSeries that I would say feels quite similar. The buttons themselves, the face buttons, these also feel like classic Anbernic buttons, which in my opinion is a good thing. This is something that has been contested in the community because some people are experiencing some rubbing sensation against the plastic. If I press my buttons at a strange angle as such, I do experience a slight bit of the sensation that people are describing. However, on day-to-day use, I've tested this thoroughly. I have not experienced it myself. Your experience may vary, however. These have a nice kind of kickback to them, which is going to be really nice for any kind of button mashing game. So if you find yourself playing a Mario Party or a Mega Man or something like that where you find yourself spamming the button quite frequently, it's going to give you a nice experience. Additionally, at the top and bottom, we have two mics set up here. I haven't personally found a need for this, but if you find yourself playing some online games with mic functionality, having that additional mic is definitely going to provide a nice range of sound. Over the top, we see a beefy heatsink. Now, it's good to note that this device is passively cooled, so we're not going to see any kind of fan experience here. But this beefy heatsink and vapor chamber provides some pretty efficient cooling. I've actually run this turbo for quite prolonged periods of times, an hour and a half playing PS2 emulation on some high-end games, and I've never experienced anything too warm in my hands. Nothing significant. I would say something like the Retroid Pocket 3 or the Retroid Pocket Flip would definitely warm up in my hands quite a bit more than this ever has. Over to the side, we're not going to see any functions either to the other side. At the bottom, something to note here, however, is a SIM card slot. Now, not all devices are going to be set up with this. However, at checkout, you can actually select a 4G option. So, if you find yourself wanting to pull some cloud saves on the move, or you're playing a Genshin Impact or a game as such, this is going to be something that's going to be beneficial for you. I believe you can also make some phone calls on the device, which is, if you have that need, go to town, but I don't think a lot of us are going to find that experience, but it is a nice to have. Now, on the back, you're going to see kind of a plain design here. There hasn't been too much added. I've actually grabbed myself a pair of mouse tape to add some additional grip, similar to how Anbernic has done with some of their devices. So this thing is going to be slipping and sliding around the table. It's good to note while I'm on that point that the USB-C connection at the bottom does not provide video out. So if you're hoping to connect this to your TV and play some retro games that way, this is not going to be the device for you, unfortunately. Casting as an experience in my hands, at least, has not been the most conducive. You're going to notice input lag, you're going to notice some compression, you'll see some bitrate artifacts and such, so I personally wouldn't recommend that. I would move on to another device. Let's move on to the main entree here, this beautiful 3x2, 4.5 inch screen. The resolution on this is going to be 1620 by 1080. Now, when you look at this being a 4.5 inch screen paired with that very high 1080p resolution, we're really going to see some beautiful visuals here. Pair that as well with the fact that this is a 3x2 screen, you're going to see pixel perfect display on GBA games with no condensing or stretching, and truly a beautiful upgraded GBA image. And with the power that this is going to be able to output, we're going to be able to get into territories of 3 times and 4 times on some of these retro devices, such as the PS1 and such. Something to take into consideration with this device, however, is a lot of users are reporting a fair level of light bleed. Now, my device personally had some light bleed, nothing too significant. However, after opening up the shell and loosening some screws, namely around the joystick, I was able to lessen that effect to what you're seeing right here now. I wouldn't say this is too egregious, and I would say, something like the Steam Deck or ROG Ally, this is something that comes standard. It's not way out of the realm to expect some degree of light bleed, and I'm not experiencing it in game, so in my circumstance, I'm not too bothered by that. Looking at the top right of the screen also, you will notice a small punch out, which happens to be the charging indicator. This will either turn red or green based on your charging status. The KT-R1 is also 170 millimeters wide and around 18 millimeters thick. Now, this is not going to be a very particularly thick device. Again, we're bringing this example up quite frequently, but it would make sense compared to style. But the RG405M is a similar thickness. One very special thing about this device, at least in my opinion, is the pocketability of this. Now, we're looking at a lot of screen real estate compared to the overall dimensions. We're getting a 4.5-inch screen across only 170 millimeters wide of a device. So this is going to fit really comfortably in the hand, but also be pocketable and give you a rich full screen experience. This particular unit comes in a plastic shell. However, there are options for metal shells, I believe none of which have actually reached production due to some issues with the shell design that are being remedied and will be available in the future. But this unit itself, again, is not too much heavier than the RG405M. One thing to call out, however, is we're looking at a 7,000 milliamp hour battery in this. That's right, you heard that, 7,000 milliamps. So we're experiencing often double, even sometimes triple the territory of some of these handhelds that are out on the market. Another point I wanted to discuss was the fact that the KT-R1 actually features 2 vibration motors on either side of the device. Now, if you're playing something like the PS1 or PS2, GameCube, anything of that kind of generation, this is going to be something that's very nice. These feel fantastic compared to everything else that I've used. A lot of motors that I've experienced often have kind of a shallow feel to them, or maybe they're a little whiny and buzzy, but the fact that these feature 2, they provide a nice rich rumble that I've found to be very satisfactory for the game experience. Now onto the beef of this device. This features the MediaTek G99 following a 6 nanometer process and a Mali G57 MC2 for the GPU. As far as the CPU power, we're going to get a lot of power out of this thing. We're going to see very efficient PS2 emulation, GameCube emulation, and not to mention the fact that it is 6 nanometers, we're going to see a lot of power saving as well. This chip also features the ability to fast charge. Now, if you pick the 4x64 option, I believe you're only limited to 8 to 18 watts of fast charge. However, if you opted in for the 6x128 or the 8x256, you'll be able to charge at a 35 watt. This particular unit that I have in my hands is the 8x256, and we'll be able to see what kind of power this will produce later. This chipset can also be seen in other devices on the market right now. I believe one popular device circulating right now is that Walmart On tablet. I believe it's the 10 or the 11 Pro 2023 model. So if you have something like that on hand, you can kind of test and play and see what this is capable of. One of the defining features of the KT-R1 is the customizability. You have the option to pick a top or a bottom joystick layout, as well as the shell material. You can go for plastic or metal, and you can also specify the color you'd like, such as black, white, yellow, pink, green, red, gray, and purple on the website right now. Of what's shipped already, there's only been black, gray, purple, pink, and red, and yellow, which was later recalled at a later time. So final results may vary. Also, to note, shades do change based on the material that you pick. So, for example, a purple in plastic and a purple in metal will likely vary in shade. make the rounds for some retro console testing here briefly, but the KT-R1 really shouldn't struggle with anything up until PS2 or GameCube. In fact, you can expect 3 times or 4 times upscaling for most of these consoles. Now this is where things start to really shape up nicely for the KT-R1. Here we are running Wind Waker without any tweaks on stock settings. The ability to just start playing a game without tweaking very much is very important to me in a handheld, as I'm sure it is other people, and this is an area that the KT-R1 really excels in. PS2 emulation was something I was very excited for with the KT-R1. I wanted an experience in which I didn't have to make many tweaks or make any compromises in terms of cycle rate, underclocking, or anything of that nature. In these tests, you'll see some very minimal changes, such as changing the plugin from Vulkan to OpenGL and reducing the resolution to 1 times. In practice, the KT-R1 is capable of higher resolution for most of these PS2 games, but I didn't want to have to start making any compromises anywhere with frame rate. This is one I was really excited for. In my sessions with this game on some of my T6018 devices like the RG505, RP3 Flip, Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, anytime I'd enter a battle sequence, I'd experience some slight slowdown, namely in the audio, a little bit of a couple drop frames, but specifically when you start attacking with characters, I was noticing slowdown here and there. With the KT-R1 in turbo mode, I did not notice this at all. This is another example of a game I've had to make compromises on in the past. I'd often have to change the clock rate, and I would still experience slowdowns in towns and transitioning from area to area. You might see a small blip here and there, transitioning from area to area on this footage, but it's really minimal comparison to what I'm used to. In conclusion, I would recommend the KT-R1 for anyone who values high PPI, battery capacity, high-end emulation paired with pocketability, and audio fidelity in their handhelds, especially if you enjoy playing both 16:9 and 4:3 content. The KT-R1 is really a jack of all trades and a strong recommendation for me, with the caveat of some potential QC issues such as light bleed or squeaky buttons. However, if you're looking for a handheld with video out capabilities, an accurate D-pad to hit diagonals in fighting games, or are sensitive to minor imperfections, I would look elsewhere. The developer of the KT-R1 has promised some features down the road such as seamless save transfers, predetermined emulator game settings, a customized front end, and improvements to QC issues such as with the D-pad, buttons, and light bleed. So it will certainly be interesting to see where the KT-R1 goes from here. Thanks again for watching. Take care.